a place of choice. But anyway, I don't know. I'm a crazy person, so I was there, and I met. At Somaliland, I met our foreign policy, MOFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, office, and I became good friends with the ambassador there. From Taiwan. We have a very big office over there. That's our office that minister about 10 countries in Africa. And so, and he started sharing how, he think it would be a really great idea for Taiwan to have a working relationship with Somaliland in terms of securing rare earth mineral, in terms of getting their lithium. And coming from Wall Street, I'm pretty used to this type of multinational deals, how I put together deals with different relevant parties, such as funders, technical partners, and, etc. And my background was when I was very, very young, I did China Unicom deal. So it's a second mobile license in China. I represented the Carlyle Group in China to give them $1 billion in funding. And when China Unicom was ready to go public, they kicked out their U.S. partner, they kicked out their Japanese partner, and they say, okay, we don't need you anymore, thank you, and bye, right? So, all that money we spent with the lawyers on Sino-U.S. joint venture contracts all went, down the drain, and we got nothing in return, except we did get our capital back. So then I heard a story from a U.S. former CIA guy who told me that, the same story happened in Shanghai on a much smaller scale, which is that, an Australian guy did the same thing, and then once the project was completed, they want to kick him out. And he said, well, not so fast. I planted a lot of low-grade bombs, under the tower. So if I leave now, it's all going to blow up. And then you're going to have nothing left. So then the Chinese said, okay, you can stay. Right? So that actually worked, right? So then, taken from that lesson, I learned that if I want to do anything in any kind of emerging market where the legal system is now so developed, I really need some type of protection. So that is why I thought, okay, it's not a bad idea to work in Somaliland since we have protection with the Taiwanese embassy there. And then when that happened, Piero, and now here's the part where Piero comes in. He works for the U.S. government. He is the staff director of CECC. So what's the full name?
The Congressional Executive Commission on China.
Thank you. I can never get these names right. And so what they do is they monitor pretty much globally. Focus on China, but pretty much everywhere too, right?
Well, China's long arm that we see extending around the globe, but our focus is on China.
Right.
But yeah.
And so he also worked for one of the congressmen, Chris Smith, who is currently the chair of Africa Subcommittee for Foreign Affairs Policy Committee. Okay, see, I never get these names right. The government has, the names are way too long. They have to work on that. But anyway, so because of that, he has also been involved in Somaliland and a lot of Africa issues. Wrote the script. You wrote that for his for Chris Smith to go on the congressional hearing in with the DFC, right? To have them
Development Finance Corporation, DFC.
Yeah, DFC. It's kind of like our 协和会, very similar to Taiwan 的协和会, to commit investment in Somaliland. And, he was very kind to help with everything that Taiwan, any issues Taiwan has with Africa. The last time South Africa forced Taiwan's office to move out of the capital because of China's pressure, he immediately jumped on that issue, wrote a letter to South Africa government, right, on behalf of the U.S. Congress and say you cannot do that. So, and the last time, I don't know how much of this is actually public. I think it's a public information that Somalia.
Now it is.
No, but so the Somalia thing was the Somalia thing. That should be public. So the Somalia, under China's pressure, had forbidden any flight that carried Taiwanese citizen to fly over their air territory, which kind of prevented us from landing in Somaliland, and which at the time caused a lot of issues with our MOFA office. And, PRO and also our U.S. Embassy in Somalia also helped. So that's a long introduction about PRO. Do you want to add anything?
No, I think you've covered the field arena, so I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the last thing. Yeah, go
Now
ahead.
the interesting part.
Okay, so the last thing, not so fast. So the last thing about Piero is that we both went to Columbia and we both studied East Asian studies. And because of his interest in East Asian studies, he knows a lot about Confucianism, Daozi, and he has a Taiwanese wife. So I thought that was very important to mention, and she's sitting right here. So I have to say that. So now let's move on to Gavin. So Gavin, again, I meet him in Somaliland, and this is actually really funny. It's a very funny story. So we both were invited. Actually, all three of us are invited as foreign international guests at their presidential inauguration in Somaliland, one of the very few democratic countries in Africa. And so it's a presidential inauguration. There are a lot of diplomats over at our hotel. So I saw Gavin in the hotel lobby, and he's from the UK. People introduced me to him, and I'm kind of used to all these diplomats, kind of having that sensitive issue between Taiwan and China. So I asked him very kind of open and plain. I said, Taiwan or China? And without hesitation, he said Taiwan. No hesitation. And so I said, okay, you passed my test. Now can I have your phone number? So that's how we met, and then the next day we went to the presidential inauguration. The whole place was a total chaos. If you guys have not been to Somaliland or Africa, the way they do things is very, very different. It's quite the opposite of Taiwan. Taiwan has to plan everything out to the detail, right? So they initially were supposed to have Taiwan and American diplomats sit together, and that never happened because the UAE drove in and they just took the seats. People took my seat. I have no seat left. And so I walked to the ambassador from Turkey and I said, tell them I'm with you guys. And they said, okay. They didn't even know who I was. And they said, okay. So I sat down. And then at the end, when I was supposed to get home with my ride from the Somaliland MOFA people, she decided that she had something more fun to do. So she said, okay, why don't you kind of take care of yourself, and I'm going to go somewhere. And so I was like, hey, Gavin, are you kind enough to give me a ride? Oh, thank you. So this is when I found out. So he was so nice. He adopted me for the day. He fed me. He took me to restaurants. He introduced me to his friends. And we kind of walked, we spent a day out in Somaliland. Everywhere we go, every step we take, someone has to stop him and say, can I please take a picture with you, Sir Gavin Williamson? And I was like, oh my God, this guy is a total celebrity in Somaliland. So from then, we know he's the king of Somaliland. And they're in the process of building him a castle. And so our school has the honor of inviting him to come and speak to it at our forum. We just had a finance forum for our school. He was the former Secretary of Education, was the former Secretary of Defense, was the former chief whip, right? Am I saying it right? And out of all those jobs, he told me that the chief whip was the most powerful job out of all, including the Secretary of Defense. He says he gets to pull strings and behind the scene and make anyone do anything. So anyway, so that is a long introduction of Gavin. Anything else you want to add? Alright, so now that we have everybody seated in house, why don't we welcome our first speaker, Piero. He has a really good speech prepared for you.
All right, well, 大家好. 大家好, okay. And for those who celebrate and those who don't, happy Independence Day. Yeah. Gavin has some thoughts on that, but I'm just going to give a little disclaimer up front. What I say here, it's my personal views and not the views of the Congressional Executive Commission on China or of the U.S. government, so that way we can be more free and open too with that understanding. The topic that we've been asked to talk about is China's threat to Taiwan's national security. I'm going to take a little bit of a different tact and a different approach on that and go to the issue of legitimacy and the importance of a human rights narrative. And when we look at Taiwan's strengths vis-a-vis China, it is not something that militarily you can match one for one. I think it's very important that Taiwan invest in its defense, and especially to take an asymmetric approach so as to be able to deter China. The saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. But what strengths does China have? I think what it does have is what we can talk about as moral strength. The fact that it is a democracy, that it does have respect for human rights, constitutional governance, rule of law. These are very important. And I want to talk a little bit about, because, we talk about defense, and Taiwan's often very defensive, but it is important that we really have a grand strategy, that we do have the ability to kind of go on offense, and not necessarily militarily offense. So we have to look at where the strengths are. Just a little bit about myself. I first came to Taiwan in 1988, 民国77年. And as people know, it was a year after martial law was lifted, 戒严, right? So it was a Taiwan that was very different from the Taiwan we see now, but Taiwan that was changing. I did get to see the developments of democracy and constitutional reform, and I began to write some articles back in the 1990s on what I observed. It was interesting, when I graduated from college and I studied, as Arena said, East Asian studies, everyone said, go to China. Go to China. It's changing. It's going to become democratic. That's where all the action is. And I said, yeah, but they're communists. Okay? And I went to Taiwan instead. And even though, and I knew that martial law had been lifted. And I think it's important to keep in mind, even under martial law, it was an authoritarian government. China, the PRC, under the Chinese Communist Party, is a totalitarian government when you get down to it. And what is that distinction? Can folks here distinguish between authoritarian and totalitarian? What would be a difference in that? Yeah? No? Not at all? I disagree. Because an authoritarian government, if you oppose the government, they'll come down hard on you and they'll put you in jail. But they do allow for some civil space. They do allow, for example, there a space for businesses and entrepreneurship and that for religion. And if you look, for example, at the development of the Tanglai and what became the Minjindang, a lot of it happened in the Zanglaohui, right, in Presbyterian churches. So there was some space there that you had, and I think that's a reason that you saw that ability to change and to grow. Whereas a totalitarian one, they really care about what's in your mind. You know, that you really, the idea of nothing beyond the state, nothing beyond the party, I think is a difference. Anyway, March of 1989, I go back to the United States, and you see the Tiananmen movement there, the student movement, and it looks like democracy is blooming in China. And I thought to myself, oh, did I make a mistake here? Was I wrong? You know, then of course June 4th happened, and unfortunately it shows that yes, this is not a society that has changed. But it's not just about political differences. You know, I know last year, was it April of last year, you had that earthquake in Hualien, and unfortunately, I think 9 people died. But I'm thinking that, you know, it's sad that 9 people died. But the fact is, you know, 20 years before, 30 years before, when I first came to Taiwan, we had an earthquake, buildings would collapse. You know, that was that. You didn't see that. I mean, there's been an overall, what democratization has brought, just a development in the standards of living. Just to illustrate something, you know, in Fujian, even though it was far away, you had buildings that collapsed. And you had earth slides, landslides, which you had in Taiwan too. There's one car that was driving along when they had the earthquake, and the landslide came over and trapped 3 people in the car. One of them, though, had a cell phone, so called the police, and the police said, okay, not a problem, we'll get you out in 24 hours. And it was 24 hours, we're gonna die. Another guy, the second guy in the car, was a military veteran. And the military veteran said, I've got friends in the military, I'll give them a call. They said, not a problem, you know, Tongzhi, we'll get you out in 12 hours. 12 hours, that's not gonna be any good, we're not gonna survive this. The third guy said, just give me the phone. Okay, so he took the phone and whispered something into it. Okay, 20 minutes later, you know, they're getting dug out there, and it's the Guojia Anquan Bu. It's the Ministry of State Security, and they said, 你们3个人谁说台湾是一个独立的国家? Okay. Well, it's a bit of a joke, but you know, it's just, I think it is illustrative of how different Taiwan is from mainland China. In English I said, okay, which of you 3 guys in there said that Taiwan is an independent country? So that was okay. Yeah, so that, you know, anyway. For Taiwan, though, to know true peace, you're not going to have true peace in Taiwan, you're not going to have independence in Taiwan so long as the Chinese Communist Party is in power in mainland China. Okay, so you really need to have a long game, and we had the benefit of the 3 of us of meeting President Lai Ching-te the other day, and it's really interesting to hear some of Lai Ching-te's rhetoric. He's doing these 10 talks right now on different aspects, including democracy, including human rights. I mean, the rule of law issues there, and it's, you know, obviously it's directed towards domestically, towards the Taiwanese people. But I think if you look at his rhetoric, the 10-10 speech that he gave, you know, he's somebody from a deep green background. And I know I have to be careful here when I talk about that, especially with Arena. But, you know, he's really wrapped himself in the red, white, and blue. Gavin, not our red, white, and blue on this Independence Day, July 4th, but it's the ROC red, white, and blue. And he's even talked about the history of the Republic of China before 1945. He's talked about Huangpu, the military academy, Whampoa. So somebody from a deep green background, it's very interesting that he has adopted this rhetoric. I was speaking last January to a group of Air Force officers, and it was all about, you know, strategy, all the conferences. And they asked me, because I work for the Congressional Executive Commission on China, it was about China, you know, but it was all about how do you counter China there. They asked me to talk about human rights. You know, we do an annual report on human rights here that we We hold hearings. We also maintain a political prisoner database about China. So they wanted me to talk about human rights. And the audience was a little bit skeptical. They're all military officers, Air Force officers. And President Jimmy Carter had just died. And there was a number of people were saying, well, Jimmy Carter, he emphasized human rights, and he was a failure. Human rights should have no part of our foreign policy. And I said, well, there you're wrong. You're wrong, not to speak ill of the dead, but first off, Jimmy Carter was not, I would not call him a human rights president. He was a failure as a human rights president. And why was he a failure? Because he failed to understand that the existential threat of our time was the Soviet Union, that communism was an existential threat. And therefore, he put pressure on the Shah of Iran. The Shah of Iran was a terrible authoritarian government. If you got crosswise, he had his Savak, his secret police that would torture you. But what did he replace it with? What was replaced? Iran of the mullahs, a far worse situation. Same thing in Nicaragua. You had Somoza, a dictator. What was it replaced with? It was replaced with the Sandinistas, again, a communist regime, okay? And you could even say it was Jimmy Carter who switched recognition of Taiwan ROC to the mainland. Again, it was an authoritarian government at the time, to your point there, yet, you did switch, again, a far worse thing. But you know who got human rights right? Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan saw it really was a question of legitimacy, of human dignity, that the Soviet Union was a terrible oppressor. Poland, we got a couple people from Poland here, how the countries of Eastern Europe were kept under domination during the Soviet period. So he was somebody who emphasized, yes, America, peace through strength, he did that, but he also emphasized the importance of rhetoric, of identifying that this is an evil empire, Zhenming, right? To call something by its proper name. He identified that. He said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. The importance of rhetoric there and moral rhetoric. And you know who had, Stalin, the Soviet dictator, was asked, well, what would the Pope think? And he said, the Pope, how many divisions does a Pope have? Very cynical. St. John Paul, who was Pope at the time of Reagan, the fall of the Soviet Empire began at Poland, and it was John Paul who just had moral force there, who helped bring down the Soviet Empire. No tanks, no divisions, but that idea of moral force. And that, I think, is what's important to emphasize here in Taiwan. Again, that's Taiwan's strength. And I think that's what President Lai is doing with his 10 talks, with his rhetoric, is talking about the Republic of China. How can you say that we're illegitimate and below you when we preceded you? His double 10 talk. It's the importance of moral narrative. The idea, that this, Arena mentioned Confucianism, but that idea of being like the North Star, Beijing, right, around which all other stars do homage because of that moral strength. Okay, again, so this is what I think is very important. So anyway, it's very interesting too when we talked. Asked President Lai, is his 10 topics, is his 10 points, is it directed towards a domestic audience but also a mainland China audience? He said, well, we can't get this message through because the internet is blocked or whatever. If you read the Global Times or if you read the China Daily, they are up in arms about his speech because they know that it does get through. The message does get through. And right now, I think we're at a period of great vulnerability in China. After that Tiananmen Square, the massacre that occurred there, the Tiananmen massacre, the Chinese Communist Party reached a grand bargain with the Chinese people. It said, we will make you prosperous, but you must give us total political control, total political domination. Xi Jinping broke that grand bargain, because the Chinese people right now do not have prosperity. They have a 996 economy. Many of them just lay flat because it's the economy is so bad. They have forced labor there. That's why is it that they're able to undercut on price? It's because they don't pay people wages, or proper wages. Economically, it's in a very, very vulnerable position. So that bargain that was struck with the Chinese people has been broken. Right now, I think, and we can go into it more in Q&A, the leadership in Beijing, it's Xi Jinping's hold on power is not very strong. President Li's message, I think, at least as I interpret it, is you can have economic prosperity and you can have freedom. You look at Taiwan, that's an example of that. Now, here's something that might get me into a little bit of trouble. When I speak to a blue audience, they think I'm green. When I speak to a green audience, they think I'm blue. And when I speak to a white audience, they think, it doesn't matter what they think. No. Kidding. If there's anyone from the TV, paise. What's that? I'm on live stream, yes. I'm kidding, folks. Paise. Yeah, just it was a joke. So sometimes, but here's an important point that I want to make here. In 2012, in China, there was a document that was released in the highest branches of the Politburo there, called Document Number 9, certain developments in the communique on developments in the ideological sphere. And it said, among other things, that democracy and direct elections, that human rights, that constitutionalism and rule of law were Western impositions. Okay? And that had nothing to do with the Chinese tradition. Okay, that was incompatible with the Chinese tradition. It's very important, this is where I get into trouble, it's very important not to reinforce that narrative. There are some people in Taiwan that say, Taiwan is Taiwan, China is China, nothing to do with that. We're democratic, they're totalitarian. Arena's gonna give me a hard time about that. But that, I think, is not a good narrative to have. Okay, it's important to say that, yes, we are, as President Lai says, 中华民国 Taiwan, okay? Yes, we are Taiwan, but we're also the Republic of China. We also have something to say to the Chinese people. We can tell you that, we can show you that you can be prosperous and democratic. You have, for example, your constitution, your 5 branches of the Constitution, the 侦查院 and the 考试院. Right? These are two, people say, oh, we don't need them anymore. Well, why do they exist? They exist because Sun Yat-sen said that in the Chinese tradition, in the imperial times, we had a constitutionalism. It wasn't a written constitution, but we did have a notion of checks and balances. The emperor's power was never complete. There were always checks on it. You look at, you go, and actually something very, very interesting, the question of legitimacy and legitimacy of government. This is a very old debate in Chinese thought. You've had 2 political traditions, and when Xi Jinping and when the Communist Party says that democracy, human rights is not part of the Chinese tradition, that's partially true. It's partially true. You have fa jia, you have Chinese legalism. Okay, that is Chinese legalism. In some ways, you could talk about China, what we see in the mainland, it's legalism onto which you've glommed on Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, Shiism, okay? But there is another tradition as well that is proto-democratic and is comparable of a human rights dialogue. And that, I think, is Mencian Confucianism. It's not completely democratic, but what Mencius said, who comes first? The people. Then grains and altars, the function of the state, and only third comes the emperor. This question of legitimacy, 2 years ago, Li Keqiang, you know who Li Keqiang was, the premier in China. 李克强 OK 对不起我的发音不是那么好 OK sorry 李克强offered an alternative. He's still a communist. That's not to say he's a saint, but he was more open to the people. He was critical of Xi Jinping's economic record there, and he gave a final speech before he stepped down and retired. A couple months before he died, which seems to have been killed now. It's pretty clear, I think. And in that speech, you know what he said? He said, 人在干，天在看. Now, I know to a Taiwanese audience, 人在干, oh, it's 人在做，天在看. No, but what he said was 人在干，天在看. You know, but that's what those are. Don't blame me. Blame Li Keqiang. Okay, if that. But the idea that men act and heaven watches, the idea of heaven, and what does that echo? That echoes. Mengzi, Mencius, that echoes the Book of Documents, Shu Jing, right? That idea that heaven sees with the eyes of the people and hears with the ears of the people. And you know, where Mencius talks about the idea of Tianming, the mandate of heaven, okay? It goes to the question of the legitimacy of government. There, and you know, he's asked the question, is it ever justified to overthrow a government and to overthrow a king? And what answer does Mencius give? Does he say it is justified to do so? Yes or no? Yes. Yes? No, he doesn't say that. He says it's not, because a government is legitimate, a king is legitimate, but it is justified to overthrow a tyranny and to overthrow a tyrant, Bao Jun, right? That is justified. Bao Jun, Bao Zhen and Bao Jun. Okay, thank you. Fourth tone. Oh, okay. My Chinese is very, very bad. Yeah. So anyway, this what Li Keqiang was doing was he was directly challenging Xi Jinping's legitimacy. And he was doing it from the Chinese tradition, and he was doing it in the name of a sort of democracy by appealing to the people, and also to appealing to a law above the law, heaven. Heaven watches, okay? It judges men's actions. So right now, you know, with the CCP really in a very vulnerable stage, with the Chinese, you know, we hear about all the pressure that they give militarily, how the crossovers into the ADIZ, you know, the gray zone tactics and all that. Again, what does Taiwan have? You have that moral strength. You have that narrative. You have democracy. You have human rights, and you have rule of law. And just in conclusion, yes, you know, back in 1988, I remember going to the Zongtong Fu, the presidential thing where we were the other day, and they used to have these big character posters, and I remember it said "Fan Gong Bi Sheng," right? Yes, yeah, the victory over communism will succeed, and that is very, very important. But it is not enough. Not just that, but 民主必胜. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you, Piero. It's quite fascinating. Now you guys know what we learned at Columbia in East Asian Studies. And I was a bad student, but I actually had summa cum laude. So I still believe that Taiwan is Taiwan and China is China, and I beg to differ. But now next we're going to hear from Gavin's view. He has been here for a week. So let's see what you have to say.
Is that working? So thank you ever so much for hosting me here. It's a great privilege to be here, and I'm afraid I have not studied China in the same way as Piero has. But what I do come with is just open eyes. Now, I think that so often human nature is actually to always have that optimism bias. It is quite the most natural thing for every single one of us to see the very best in another person. Every single one of us wishes to think that our neighbour, our friends, our family will always act in the kindest and best interests. Now, the first time that I visited this region, which was in the early 2000s, the first time I came to Taiwan, the first time I went to the People's Republic of China, most people I spoke to spoke with an optimism, spoke with a hope, spoke with a desire to actually reach out to their friends, to their neighbours, to people that they felt actually wanted to work with them. Taipei in the 2000s was one that spoke of the opportunity and the excitement that they saw across the Taiwan Straits. But what we have seen in that time is that optimism, that hope, that human desire to believe in the best of people has been diminished, has been eroded, has been worn away. And that wearing away has been because of the acts of others. It's the acts of how the People's Republic of China and its leadership, most importantly, has acted. Not just how it has spoken, but how it has delivered on its deeds. How it has seen itself as a person that has to be listened to, but a person that is unwilling to listen to others. Now, if I look across the world, every country, almost every country, including the United Kingdom, including the United States, including Taiwan herself, wanted to believe that there was that capacity to change within, and by reaching out that we would help deliver that change in itself. But the world has moved on, and the reality of that regime and what it is willing to do to get its way has sunk in. But maybe not quite sunk in enough. When I was privileged to be the Secretary of State for Defence in the United Kingdom, one of the things that struck me was actually the British policy. We talked of it as a golden era with China. We had our Prime Minister and President Xi drinking beer together in an English pub. We had an optimism that actually by holding out that hand of friendship, that it was going to change the relationships, it would deepen the relationship between our two nations, it would bring prosperity to both. The reality was that actually what that was seen in the PRC was not friendship, but weakness. And you saw so often, not just in the UK, people moderating their actions in order to be able to appease. The reality is, appeasement will not change a tyrant. The more that you go that extra mile with a hope that they will see sense, they do not see that as understanding. They do not see that as you wishing to be able to reach an accommodation. They see that as one simple thing. They see it as weakness in order to push harder, in order to push further, in order to take advantage. They do not see it as their opportunity to give a little. It's not about getting a win-win situation. It is about the opportunity to merely take more. And there has been this naivety of the West. There has been a naivety that has infected so much of us with the hope that we can deliver that change. And you have to look at Beijing, and you have to give them credit for actually understanding the weaknesses of what they would see as their enemy and exploiting them. Realizing that they can ratchet up more and more and more. And when I became Secretary of State for Defense, you could see where they had taken things. I remember the first time I gave the order to take a Royal Naval ship through the Taiwan Strait. This was met by universal resistance. It was the first time in many, many years that a Royal Naval ship had gone through the Straits. It was many, many years because since a French ship, an Australian ship, a New Zealand ship, a Japanese ship had done the same. But for me, it was important that we do it. Because yes, of course, the United States has been doing freedom of navigation through the Straits for many, many years. But Beijing's aim is to squeeze others out, to intimidate them, to threaten them, to make them feel as if it's not worth them taking the risk to do it. So when the brave men of HMS and women of HMS Albion went through that straits, what was Beijing's reaction? It was to scream, it was to shout, it was to threaten. But fundamentally, they knew that by actually Britain going through the straits, it would embolden others. So they want to crush people's spirit to do that. They want to reduce people's room to maneuver. But by doing that, well, fundamentally they shouted. They didn't actually do anything. And that is what often bullies do. They will threaten, but actually when someone stands up to them, they will back down. And what do you see that followed that? You see France, you see Australia, you see Japan doing the same. It starts to get normalized. But what they are wanting to do continuously is to make the activities of free democratic countries, the rules-based system, not normal. Because they firmly believe in a rules-based system, but their own rules. The only rules that can advantage themselves. And this is such a great threat, because you can see it. When you abandon large chunks of freedom, they will continue to take more. And there is nothing more basic than the freedom of navigation. Now, many of you will probably have not remembered Sir Walter Raleigh. Sir Walter Raleigh was one of the greatest seafarers of British history, and it was not the last Queen Elizabeth that he served, but the first Queen Elizabeth. And it was Sir Walter Raleigh that commented, "Whoever commands the seas commands the trade of the world. Whosoever commands the trade of the world commands the riches of the world." Now I would say that the leadership of the People's Republic of China understand that better than virtually any leaders around the world. And they know that by their creeping power, their creeping reach, it actually reduces everyone else's maneuver. It is 17 years since I was last in Taiwan. When I came back here, I noticed a difference. A real difference in the understanding of what Taiwan was. A greater sense of pride a greater desire to actually not be defined by a neighbor, but to define yourself. That for me is absolutely essential. And I would say we need to see more of that. Most countries will often respond to who shouts at them the loudest. What I would say to Taiwan is maybe now is the moment to start raising your voice. Taiwan, at every stage, has had at its true core one simple desire, is to have a relationship of peace and friendship with those who live around it. It is not a threat to anyone else. It just wishes to work with others and to have its own freedom and independence. We need to push the argument that if you're going to make a choice, what is that true choice? On the one side of the straits, you have a nation that believes in freedom, that believes in democracy, that believes in discussion and argument, that believes in a free press, believes in having a legal structure that protects its citizens. And then on the other side of those straits, you have a totalitarian regime that believes in nothing other than the perseverance of its own power. Let us push the argument more that nations need to start making an assessment of where its values are. Taiwan faces many, many threats. But let us not be so timid in maybe just asking for other nations to do a little more for Taiwan. You are part of that democratic family. You're part of that bulwark that stops bad people doing bad things to good people. It is right, as I said at the start, that we wish to see the best in people. But we need to support those good people wherever they are on the surface of the globe. Because those who wish to erode those freedoms, whether it is in Ukraine, whether it is in this region, they are all our enemies, and the thing that they fear more than anything else, the thing that scares them, is that good people stand together. Is that good people stand as one and they are willing to push back. So I would say to Taiwan, try and do that little bit more of asking others to do more for you. Because your freedom, your independence, your sovereignty, it matters to every single nation on this globe. Because your sovereignty is our sovereignty. Thank you.
I think you're putting Ivy in tears. She is so moved, I think her tears just fell down. And you got all done from after lunch?
It was good lunch.
So
It's the accent.
it's the British accent. So here's the story. He didn't know he was giving a speech. So I told him after lunch. We were having lunch and I said, oh, and by the way, you're giving a speech. He goes, oh, really? And now I know why you keep getting elected. And I also know why you get others elected. Okay, so now we have both speeches done. Excellent speech. Now you get sort of two different views. One who has been studying Taiwan, China for a really long time, and another one who is kind of maybe a little bit more fresh perspective on Taiwan, right? And one who, from the U.S. who has a very long-standing relationship with Taiwan, and another one who has kind of maybe a little bit further away and not really has that close relationship with Taiwan, and they're a different perspective. Now, when when people learned that Gavin is going to be here, I got a lot of requests for meetings from all different departments, governments, and media friends, and we had a foreign correspondence club dialogue yesterday, where Gavin was being asked a lot of very tough questions, and to my surprise, he was not being a very typical politician. He actually...
I just get myself into trouble, don't I?
I don't know. Are you okay? Because, he delivered a panel at the Ocean Affairs Forum, and I think your embassy was sitting down there listening to you.
I'm sure they were excited.
So here, this is a much friendlier venue, and, I get to ask you anything. Is there anything that's off limit?
Not for me.
Are you guys afraid of me?
Well, we are afraid of you, but it's, but ask away, and if we have to, we'll dodge. But
Okay, so if you don't want to comment, you don't have to. But I'm just going to ask. So, Gavin, you said that Taiwan has to be a little more assertive, needs to push it a little more, push its limit a little more. Ask for assistance. Ask for other countries for what they can do, and not be so differential. You made a comment that we're too polite here in Taiwan, and we're not asking enough. One of the issues that Taiwan has is its own domestic kind of political issues where the two major parties cannot agree with each other on your particular view. How much can we ask? How far can we go? How much can we push? Right? And when he first landed in Taiwan, I first saw him the first day, I gave him a very quick rundown of what's going on domestically in our political landscape. So you kind of have a little bit of understanding. So, and I'm sure you're very familiar because UK and US probably all have the same thing. The blue and the red cannot agree, and the Labour and the Conservative Party cannot agree. So what do you think, how do you feel about how Taiwan can actually, if we do want to follow your suggestion, but the internal, domestic political landscape, the two parties just can't agree with each other. We have a big recall right now. How do you feel about that?
Okay, so the beauty of Taiwan is the fact that you do have disagreement. If you had nothing but total consensus on everything, well, that would hardly be normal. And I can promise you, there's a dozen things that I can walk into a room with my friends who are in parties, a party opposite to me, and we can have a ferocious argument about, but actually we can agree to disagree. But if I just sort of pick up on the issue of where I think I use the expression, sometimes Taiwan can be too polite. I think this is one of the most endearing things about Taiwan, but it shouldn't also be used as your Achilles heel. So Taiwan is an immensely successful nation on the global stage. It dominates certain sectors, and it is incredibly competitive in so many more. So when you look at investing on a global stage, I say simply, just actually use that as part of your armory. Make sure that when you're actually talking to people about how you invest and how you actually maybe Taiwanese businesses or investments are made abroad, ask the simple question of what is that country going to do for us? How are you going to be supporting us when we make those moves? Actually, when you speak to parliamentarians and you ask them the simple question, who do you think are the good guys in all of this? It is a very odd person that says China as against Taiwan. And there is a deep well of goodwill. And what I would say is marshal your arguments, marshal your asks carefully, but start pushing away and asking them. Because your opponents are doing that every single day, even when there is not a reason to ask. They will appeal to people's greed, their desire to sell cars or handbags or so much more in order to be able to try and influence people. Yet Taiwan does so many things across the globe, but so rarely asks for anything in return. And I would say, don't be foolish, but let us start taking some of those steps which start rebalancing. Just pushing a little bit more back as to where other people are pushing their arguments. If you're doing something for someone, is it unreasonable to ask them to do something for yourself? And I do not think it is. I do not think that is aggressive. I think it is logical, I think it is sensible, I think it is what every other nation in the world is doing. Just being silent will not mean that people will forget that you are here, because actually your neighbour is obsessed with you. So every advantage, every tactical advantage that you've got to use. So please, just go out there, ask a little bit more, push a little bit harder, and I think you will possibly be surprised at actually people's response when you ask for something, because actually you are the people with right on your side.
Do you want to comment?
I think that's very important. I think that one way that Taiwan can be more assertive is in interacting with countries that tout themselves as democracy. Latin America is a part of the world where Taiwan still has diplomatic representation, but it has declined. Oftentimes, you see countries in the Americas that have relationships with China that have spurned Taiwan for some of the reasons that Gavin mentioned, this narrow self-interest, yet they purport to uphold themselves as democracies. Criticize that. He said, you have abandoned a democracy in favor of a totalitarian, ruthless regime. Look at the record. Look at the debt bondage that so many nations find themselves in, and the corruption that accompanies it. Call it out. Again, the great resource that you have is this moral narrative. You have democracy, you have freedom, you have human rights. Okay, and you have an opponent that wishes to take that from you. Be aggressive, assert yourself on the stage. We in America a number of years ago passed the Taipei Act, and that's something. How is it that we all know each other from Somaliland? Because this is an area of the world where it's like, and people don't know, it's also a de facto nation that is unrecognized. The world hasn't recognized it. It is, as we were just there for the peaceful transfer of power in December, the three of us were there, from one party to another, because they had elections there, unlike in Somalia there. So it is important to spread democracy and to call out hypocrisy. So that's, I think, very, very important, and we will do our best, and consistent with the Taipei Act, to promote that in Taiwan around the world. Thank you.
All right, this is one tough question. It's okay. We don't have to clap every time. We'll just save it for the end, and you guys don't have
or
to.
Or save it for Arena.
Save it for me. You don't have to stand up either. I know I'm the only person sitting. This is a tough one. So what should we ask from UK? And what should we ask from the US? Well,
I think that you should be asking for some upgraded form of recognition. Ask that you, what's that?
Yeah, keep going.
Well,
I like that. I like hearing
I mean,
that.
look, we've had 2 Germanys, we have 2 Koreas. Some news that came out very recently about Kissinger and Nixon when they went to China and how naive and stupid they were. And Henry Kissinger, again, I find myself, don't talk ill of the dead, but here I am. I know, but seriously, somebody who made a tremendous amount of money from China that is a really an existential threat to the United States and certainly Taiwan on the front line. But China was in a period of great vulnerability. We could have kept a dual recognition. We could have kept U.S. soldiers here, but we didn't. Talk about naivete. So I think, right now we have a very different administration in Washington. It can be a little up and down and hard to follow. But you do have, I think, sort of a decisiveness which is important, and you should kind of, I think, take advantage of it, but you do have to ask. Thank you.
And really to sort of echo, we shouldn't just think everything is preserved in aspic. A decision that was taken many decades ago should be the decision of a policy position evermore. It's how do you take some of those upticks and have a more sensible sort of level of recognition. We all have offices and missions in Taipei, but is that truly reflective of where Taiwan is today? And I don't think it is. I would also, I think Britain has been more forward-leaning than most other European nations, where you've got economic agreements between the UK and Taipei. I would sort of try and reinforce some of that deeper relationship between Taiwan and the United Kingdom, and actually, use that and sort of to sort of get Britain to chivvy others along. Now, let's not, Europe is not a homogenous bloc. There are many different countries with many different interests. Some of those interests will be very much China-focused. Some of those potentially could be much more Taiwan-focused. So use that diversity in order to create allies, as against just leaving the field purely there for the PRC, because I think far too often they have a run, and we shouldn't be allowing that to be the case.
We have a question here.
Tony Hugh, former U.S. government official. Sir, what Taiwan should ask for? I think for the United States, strategic clarity. The ambiguity time is out. It doesn't deter anymore. Second, and you can do something with this, is removal of some of our self-imposed restraints, such as our guys come over here, can you wear a uniform? Taiwan guys go to the U.S., can you wear a uniform? We're not fooling anybody. We're here, right? So that used to bother me a lot. When I was coming over, I got a prison suit instead of my uniform. So I think that's something that we should look for changing. And also, one of the things I think is most important, and it's going to cost American life, is the guy that's going to run the Joint Task Force to protect Taiwan if China does something, he's not allowed to come to Taiwan. That 3-star, J3 over at Indo-PACOM, cannot come here. You know how many times he's been to Korea? He's there almost every 3-4 months he's there. He understands the terrain, the environment. If North Korea do something stupid, we're going to win. But this guy who's going to lead the defense of Taiwan has never been here. That's it. We're shortchanging ourselves. Okay, that's something we need to change. And Gavin, I'm glad you brought up the word appeasement, because fundamentally, the difference between the two parties in Taiwan is peace through strength or peace through appeasement. And you're absolutely right. appeasement will not work with China because my own personal experience when I used to take DoD delegation to China for meetings, and you know how it goes. My talking points, interagency approved talking points. And before we go, we have those interagency meetings. And I was yelled at for, if you treat them like friends, they'll be your friend. If you treat them like your enemy, they're gonna be your enemy. It doesn't apply with China. Exactly as you said. You treat them as friend, you give them an inch, they want a foot. You're scared of me. Exactly as you said. They take it as, you have something you worry about me, so I want to take another step toward you. So this is an attitude I think a lot of people here do not understand. The ones that support appeasement do not understand. China look at appeasement differently because the Westerners, we sort of mirror image ourselves with China. You know, if China treats us nice, we reciprocate. They don't reciprocate. They just take another step. I think, therefore, thank you for bringing that up, and I think the people of Taiwan should recognize the difference between peace through strength and peace through appeasement is that if it's strength, your peace is under your control. If it's through appeasement, your peace is controlled by Beijing. And that can never be a long-lasting peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think you raised a number of interesting points regarding our U.S. military. You have my card, right? So we've got the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, and you've kind of given some ideas for amendments there. But why don't you send me an email with those ideas so we can capture that. On the issue of strategic ambiguity, you know, I agree with you. But you know, the concept was acta non verba. Acts, not words, is what really conveys a message. You know, we had that situation where President Biden was talking in unambiguous terms, but then it was walked back. That was not helpful. Frankly, the withdrawal from Afghanistan was not helpful for world peace. I do think that distinct from strategic ambiguity is strategic unpredictability. And that in some ways, so I do think that the world is a safer place after the United States bombed Iran's nuclear facilities. I don't know what the intelligence was, but my understanding is that we were very close to the world being a more dangerous place. That sort of decisive action, I think that isn't always easy to predict, does really help keep the peace. So I think, yes, I hear your point, and I think it's well taken, but oftentimes it's, the actions speak louder than words, and that's, you know, that is, I think, very important. Thank you.
So, there is no ambiguity about what Taiwan is. Taiwan is a free, independent, sovereign nation. Simple as that. But there is a danger. By not just mentioning that, you fool yourself into thinking it gives you a protection. And it doesn't. And it goes back to that appeasement issue about the take and the take and the take. My grandfather always used to say, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me." And I think that is actually one of those points that doesn't just apply to Taiwan. It applies to Britain, it applies to the United States, it applies to Australia, France, Europe. You see China aggressively asserting itself and using tactics and the grey zone, not just to undermine your democracy, not just to undermine your freedoms, but to undermine mine and my nation's as well. So when is the time that we actually stand up to be counted? When is the time that we start to say enough is enough? Because until we start consistently pushing back, they will continue taking. So there needs to be more bravery. We've got to put aside appeasement, and we have to have a clarity of strategy about how we check the undermining, the erosion of our values and our freedoms right across that democratic world. And the quicker we do it, the more assertive that we do it, the safer every single one of us is.
See, this is my friend, why I say he's so unlike other politicians. He just speaks his mind. Am I going to get you in?
This is why I'm a backbencher.
Am I getting you into trouble? My next question for you guys, you both are, experts in this, and I will have another expert sitting here. So maybe Tom, you can comment as well. Is China's infiltration into so many different places now with their disinformation, with whatever that they do. And Gavin, you have your first-hand experience with Huawei, right?
Yes.
And you. A lot of that. We have Tom McDavid here, is the chairman of Washington Times. He also does a lot to help. So maybe I can ask you two to share, and maybe Tom, you want to comment? Yeah.
Yeah, you want us to comment on the yeah.
What do we do? How do we
Sure.
deal with it?
So, yeah, I think it's important to understand what the United Front is. And here, I think that history of the ROC, the Republic of China, before 1945 is very illustrative. The United Front Works Department is the secret weapon of the Chinese Communist Party. It is not so much an espionage unit. They're not trying to take information out of your brains as much as they're trying to put information in your brains. And they're very good at it. Many ways, if you look at the history of the Kuomintang pre-1945 and the United Fronts that it had with the Chinese Communist Party, they were very effective of burrowing from within. There's a story about Zhou Enlai seeing an anthill and how it was burrowed out from within. That is the tactic. It hasn't changed. It's something that we see in the United States. The Chinese Communist Party often, so one thing that they do very effectively is that they say, well, any opposition to that is racist in the United States. They'll say that it's anti-Chinese racism. That is another reason why I think Taiwanese voices are very important, because if I speak out and I oppose that and I say that what you're doing here is you've got a United Front operation, and I can be very specific as to what that might be, then that the accusation that they will come back is, well, that's racist. That's why it's important for Arena to be speaking, because she can do it a lot more winsomely than I can, and avoid that. But so it is. I think you see it here in Taiwan. You see it around the world, and often what they use is money to co-opt. They also use what the Soviets used to call kompromat. They put people in compromising situations and then apply pressure. They also apply to ideological affinity. It could be, you don't have so many true believers in Marxism or Maoism these days, though some do exist. But what they do, and that's that racism narrative, they understand the dialectic. They understand that notion of oppressor and oppressed in much much of the West in academia, in our institutions, they have implicitly internalized the dialectic, where they think in terms of oppressor and oppressed. So there was an incident at George Washington University where, do you know the Australian Chinese artist Bai Cao? He does a series of artwork that shows the oppression of the CCP. There were a number of Uyghur and Tibetan students and others who put up these posters. The Chinese Students and Scholars Association, which works very closely with the Chinese embassy and consulates in the United States, said, "Hey, that's racist." The university president immediately said, "Oh, well, we have to take it down." And it was only after the university was educated, look, no. You want to talk about oppressor and oppressed? This is the Chinese Communist Party. They're the greatest oppressor, especially of the Chinese people, especially of Tibetans and Uyghurs. And I see over here Wu Kai-shi, one of the heroes of Tiananmen, and it's a pleasure great to see you. It's someone I greatly admire for his work in defense of democracy in China during the Tiananmen student movement. They oppress people from Hong Kong. I know a number of young Hong Kongers who have bounties on their heads. And I think that's important to remember. The greatest victim of the Chinese Communist Party are people who live within China. I just had a meeting this morning with a group of Taiwanese doctors and a lawyer, and one of the things that we've worked on at the Congressional Executive Commission on China, and I think one of the most horrific human rights abuses is that of forced organ harvesting. Okay, people, is anyone here 28 years old? 28 years old? Okay. Yeah, so 28-year-old. Prime organ. Yeah, they've calibrated as such that 28 years old is the ideal age for organ removal. They take Uyghurs there from these camps in China, Falun Gong practitioners, and because if they have a match, they will take them and they will harvest their organs. They'll butcher them. It is one of the most horrific human rights abuses. This is the Chinese Communist Party. This is the absolute degradation of human dignity. Again, Ronald Reagan had that vision. He saw the Soviet Union as the greatest threat to human dignity, an existential threat. My goodness, how many business leaders, how many politicians fail to see that in communist China and what that is? It is a failure of moral vision. We must be very clear, and we must articulate an alternative, and that's the importance of Taiwan. That's the importance of moral narrative in all of this. Yes, it's important that we invest in defense, and frankly, Taiwan should do more than 3%, okay? But it is your strongest asset that you have is that of your democracy, your freedom, your respect for human rights, and message that to the Chinese people. Don't just focus. Don't just say, well, that's China and this is Taiwan, and we're different. No, go on offense. Message that, and that I believe is what President Lai is doing, and that is what's so important as well. Thank you.
So I would I was quite embarrassed when the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, our Treasury Minister, went over to China in order to do a trade discussions, and they come back with a few £100 million worth of trade deals that were always going to be there. And then you see the government not actually prescribing the United Front in United Kingdom. And you can't help feeling that for a relatively small amount of money, Britain is in danger of tacking away from actually dealing with where there is a real threat. Because this is as much of a threat as we do face from Russia, and that we do face from Iran. So let us not pretend that Chinese operatives aren't working in the United States. And we have to use every opportunity and every means to deal with that, expose them and throw them out. And frankly, if they do not wish to invest in the United Kingdom, it is better to preserve our freedom and it's better to preserve our integrity than actually to get investment from someone who is never going to be a true partner going forward. And these are some of the choices that we are going to have to all make. And I think that there has been great movement in Taiwan in terms of extra investment in defence. I'd echo your view that actually 3% is good. I would say you will need to invest more. We've come to the same view, and the threats to us are probably further away than they are the threats to you, and we have worked out that we need to be investing more than 3%. And I think that you will end up having to invest 4 or 5% in order to be able to prepare for the future. Because, as was said earlier, the best way to secure peace is to prepare for war, because you need to have a clear deterrence. There has to be no ambiguity. You have to be absolutely resolute that Taiwan will always stand firm for freedom, independence, and its people. And that is what will terrify them more than anything.
Thank you, Irina. Good.
Let me just introduce him. 30-second introduction. Okay, so Max, he said. I'm so scared. So Tom is the chairman of Washington Times. It's a paper that is very well circulated in the Republican Party. I was told that Donald Trump reads it every morning and takes notes. That's within 30 seconds.
Thank you, Irina. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and congratulations to Ivy and Victor for forming the Taiwan Inspirational Association. What an amazing name. I'm sorry. On this day, at this time, we're ahead of U.S. By 12 hours. But to be here at this moment to celebrate Independence Day is so meaningful to me, and I hope to you. We live in an independent country. We had a wonderful relationship with my dear friend and colleague, Sir Gavin Williamson's home country, and we enjoy that relationship that went through quite a change in the past 249 years. Next year it's going to be 250 years, and I would say we should mark this time together. Independence is a universal value. The human being, the nature of reality, is based upon the principle of independence and interdependence, give and take action. So the theory that guides, the ideology that motivates Xi Jinping is based upon essentially false premises, just as the Soviet Union was of its Marxist-Leninist view. So I am so encouraged by you and by my friends, which is why I take notes. I feel like I'm in a graduate school seminar with two amazing professors, and we have so much to learn from them. And thank you both for your service and such different styles of rhetoric and oratory. So thank God for America and England. Yes, yes it did. And another remarkable example of oratory and passion is from Taiwan and New York and Wall Street. So, Irina, thank you. I'd like to just say one point, picking up on what both my colleagues said, the importance of finding your voice. Of course, there's the defense issue. There's all the armament, the practical, physical, military aspect of fighting. But in essence, the war we're at is a civilization crisis that is rooted
in ideology, in a difference of view of life. The Xi Jinping thought, which is required learning, is based upon Marxism, Leninism with Chinese characteristics. The definition of a human being is fundamentally different than the rest of the world, which is why the horrors of organ harvesting. Can you imagine that happening in the 21st century? It's barbaric. It has to be called out. Why does it happen? Because of a difference of a view of life. I therefore would say it's an ideological, philosophical, even spiritual crisis. And that's why for me, we've just launched a new project, and thank you for your support, Arena, called the Taiwan Freedom Project, holding up the freedom narrative against the totalitarian narrative. The totalitarian narrative has no chance. Therefore, and I have been going back 40-some, 50-some years, when I lived in British Columbia, I learned about the I Ching, and I had 12 years of Catholic education and was searching for depth, and I found such meaning there in Chinese traditional thought, but also in Tai Chi and Kung Fu. So then I started to work with Tai Chi and learned about push hands and all of that. So the point is, what is the strategic focus now for you and for me as citizens is to engage, just like in Tai Chi. Engage, right? Second, disarm the opponent. If it's an ideological battle, a battle of values, a battle of moral clarity versus moral corruption, it's a lack of morality, then what can we do to engage and disarm the opponent? The way to disarm the opponent, the way to disarm what's false, is simply with a heart of true love, tell the truth. Therefore, the critical role as a chairman of a media company is content. The armament we need, much more important than the most sophisticated physical armaments and weaponry, is the weapon of content, of truth, of words and images. Second, our greatest strength is working together as a human family. So I'm a student of strategy, of grand strategy. We need the content. We need each other, the people, the networks. And then we need the channels of communication. And we need the programs and the technology. So the Taiwan Freedom Project, which is just getting launched, needs your help. We envision a global network of multi-sector, multi-level people that take ownership of this battle. It's our battle. We are the soldiers. And the weapons are our thinking, our heart, our communication. Let's work together to create, and I think the final point I'll make here is the national bird of Taiwan, the magpie. I live near a park, and in the morning I get up to meet sunrise as my practice and do Tai Chi and have my coffee and, whatever. And I am so moved when I hear a flock of egrets in Texas, or the sparrows, or the orchestra, the symphonic, harmonic power of a flock of birds. When voices by the millions reach out and point your words directly to the heart of Xi Jinping. Your view of life is false. It will never stand. And I will give my life on the beaches, the western beaches of Taiwan. I'll give my life there because that's so important. I'm so grateful for this opportunity, and on this day, Independence Day, I've got to hold back my tears. Bless Taiwan, and God bless America.
I never knew that all my friends are such good speakers. I'm so impressed by you guys. Here's a question here.
Hi, it's Sam Howarth here with Taiwan Current News. So my question for Sir Gavin Williamson, perhaps, but it could probably go a bit wider, and if you'd be willing to engage too. So in 14 years of Conservative government, the Conservative Party's had quite a strange dance with the Chinese Communist Party in China. As you mentioned earlier, there was the golden era, optimism, pint drinking dictator. And then after that, we've had some kind of perhaps less positive episodes in the UK. 2022, we had the unmasking of an agent of influence, Christine Lee. 2024, and he was engaging with parliamentarians. 2024, we had Christopher Cash, Chris Berry. Chris accused and charged of working for the CCP, carrying out espionage. Chris Cash managed to get into the China Research Group with Miss Kearns, an MP, Conservative MP. And then more recently we've had Yang Tengbo, who's a good friend, or at least he was a good friend of Prince Andrew. So my question is, so what has the Conservative Party learned from these episodes, and what can Taiwan kind of take from them too?
So much, Sam. My microphone was going actually last time, and I'm not sure if that was the United Front who is working against me to try and silence me. But we got our batteries back. Some very interesting set of points. And actually, what I would say is, I remember when I first spoke up about the dangers of having Huawei as part of our national infrastructure, in terms of our 5G infrastructure. To me, it was blindingly obvious as to why you couldn't have a basic Chinese state-sponsored body running your backbone of telecommunications infrastructure. But it seems to have taken an awful long time for everyone else to truly understand and realise what the threat is. Now, you have raised quite a number of instances of where people have been exposed. I would actually see that as a positive, because actually what you're seeing is the British state not just sitting silently by, and I imagine that every time that someone has been exposed, that there has been an awful lot of pressure coming from Beijing to discreetly manage it, where they disappear out of a country and it's not mentioned again. But not only has it been dealt with, but it's been dealt with publicly. And that, to me, is incredibly important. Because if we don't talk about the threats, people don't understand the threats, and that they can be ignored. I want to see more of this, not less of this, because sadly, the list of names that you mentioned, I do not believe that is every single name that is there. We need to be stepping up, we need to be doing more. I think Britain has got some of the world's greatest security services, and we're very privileged to have them and incredibly honoured by the work that they do to keep not just Britain safe, but people across the globe safe. And I hope that if we're here in a few years' time, you can read out a list that is far longer, far more extensive, and actually goes to show how Britain is taking the action to deal with the threat that we face, you face here in Taiwan, and every other nation around the globe also faces.
Yes. And I just want to add to that. Gavin mentioned Huawei. I don't know if people know the role that you played. A single person who saw the threat, who was in a position to do something, and who paid a price for it. The reason that Huawei was not adopted as part of the British infrastructure is because of a stand that he took, and how incredibly important that is. Just one comment on the UK right now. Right now, the Chinese government is building an embassy, a super embassy. We are very concerned about it, and I would, and Gavin as well. And that is something that needs to be addressed by the present government. It will be a spy center. It'll also be a center of transnational repression. We've seen both in Hong Kong, both in Great Britain and the United States, but particularly in Great Britain, also these Hong Kong economic and trade offices that have become a extension, these outposts of the PRC. In Great Britain, you had active measures that were being coordinated out of the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office against Hong Kong dissidents living in the UK. We've had similar, maybe not as egregious, but we've had tracking of Hong Kong dissidents by these, by the HKEDO's, Hong Kong Economic and Trade Offices in the United States as well. So that is something where we need to look at it. And you know, there is the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations and on Consular Relations. The level of transnational repression, and I referred to it earlier as well, that we've seen from Chinese embassies and consulates in the United States, where they coordinate, for example, with the Chinese Students and Scholars Association. What was probably most egregious, I believe, is in November of 2023 at the APEC conference in San Francisco. You had peaceful protesters that were exercising their rights of free assembly and free speech and protest when Xi Jinping came. You had coordinated efforts by the Chinese embassy, Chinese consulates in San Francisco and Los Angeles to physically attack and beat these people. And the response has been abysmal of that. The Washington Post had an excellent series, which I would commend to everyone, that analyzed what happened at the APEC conference in November of 2023 in San Francisco and the level of coordination by the Chinese consulate there. That is completely unacceptable. Right now at the CECC, just to give folks a little bit of a heads up, we're not formally constituted yet, but when we do, I think the first hearing that the new chairman, who will be Senator Sullivan, intends to hold is on transnational repression directed at the Taiwan and Taiwanese people. So
Great.
It's very important.
Great, thank you. That's awesome. I don't know if you two know that actually the Somaliland telecommunication network is actually provided and serviced by Huawei. Did you guys know? Yeah, so be careful next time when you're texting. We have a question here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me at such a wonderful event. My name is Weronika Jakubczak. I'm a professor from Fire University doing research here on cognitive warfare and critical infrastructure at Taiwan University Graduate Institute for Journalism. And I am very happy to hear that there is awareness about the meaning of appeasement and the awareness about the cognitive warfare. So how the psychological operations are changing not only the way we thinking, but also we acting. And I'm a victim of this warfare because I have just written an article about the appeasement of West leading to atrocities in Ukraine. And one of my reviewers said that he doesn't see straight connection, how the West appeasement actually made Russia, so eagerly attack Ukraine and commit genocide there. And but instead, the reviewer said that I made a mistake not addressing Vladimir Putin by president in a scientific article. So this is how the cognitive warfare works in academia in Poland. And we really have to think about this appeasement, and we have to understand. We found Chinese soldiers in Ukraine. We've seen Chinese vessel conducting the hybrid warfare attack against the submarine cables, the part of critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. And bearing in mind the axiology of three warfares, that the Chinese are very secretive about what they're doing. We can imagine what is the scale of the factual activities. Therefore, apart from being very happy about this whole discussion here, I am absolutely thinking that we should gather our forces and cooperate intercontinentally. So that's why I'm very happy to hear about this initiative that comes from Washington that you just mentioned. And I think that this is something we have to do. We cannot talk that the economy is most important. The human is the most important. And the trade, how come Russians had the money to conduct the warfare? We paid for this because we were buying natural resources from them, right? So I know that it might be good to make a long-term strategy, but we have to talk about strategic autonomy. Maybe not like President Macron is talking, but on the global level between democracies, not only talking about European Union, because otherwise we will be eaten. Because the non-democratic countries, they don't understand the appeasement, they don't understand partnership. We could also see during the Obama, around like 2010s, when we had people coming to European Parliament, from like the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs from Russia. They didn't treat us as parties. They treat us as potential slaves, excuse my language. So we had to withdraw from this cooperation with Russia against Iran at that time. Thank you.
There's some questions here. So do you have a question you want to ask? Yeah. All right. Do you want to comment on her back?
Just one thing on that, because I think it's very important to understand this idea of unrestricted warfare that the PRC is waging. There's a book that was translated into English in 1999 by two PLA colonels, People's Liberation Army colonels, Colonels Wang and Liao, and it's translated as Unrestricted Warfare. And it is actions short of kinetic, and it's everything is a front. So all this that you're talking about, cognitive warfare, we're talking about the transnational oppression, we're talking even about fentanyl and the reverse opium war. All of this is part of an all-out assault. And yes, we do trade with the enemy. And that was a fundamental flaw, this idea that by engagement with the PRC that we could bring them back bring them into the world of democracy. That was a fundamental flaw. We've allowed in the World Trade Organization an economy that is predatory, that is mercantilist. It's a command economy where state resources can be put to not just sectors of the economy, but individual national champions, that steals intellectual property, that suppresses price by utilizing forced and slave labor. And even if you're a college graduate in China now under Xi Jinping's economy, you're living this 996, 9 in the morning until 9 at night, 6 days a week. It is exploitative. Yet there are vulnerabilities there. That in and of itself is a vulnerability, and that's why it is important that we press. That we do press. It's if there's a message to the workers of China, you have nothing to lose but your chains. So thank you.
So you're absolutely right to highlight the threats. When I was Education Secretary in the UK, it saddened me that I had to pass legislation to protect freedom of speech in universities, because what I was seeing was organised Chinese students suppressing the voices of Hong Kongers who were wanting to stand up for their interests, for their concerns, for their freedoms. And in a country that I would always like to have thought as free, and to be honest, before I became Education Secretary, I would never have believed I would have had to have taken such legislation through Parliament. I think it actually goes to show how organised and how far-reaching our enemy is. And if I can just touch upon Ukraine. Ukraine offers an awful lot of lessons. It shows that actually when democratic will falters, those who wish to take advantage will see that faltering of will as a green light in order to act. So you saw the US abandonment of Afghanistan, which to me sent a green light to President Putin. You saw the fact that actually President Putin had taken Crimea, to taken large parts of Donbass, and the West didn't act, and they tried to come up with a fudgy compromise that wasn't in the interest of Ukraine and didn't bring peace and hasn't brought stability. So it keeps coming back to some people just cannot be appeased. And I think it's also really important, language. I would say, and you probably wouldn't everyone agree, but I'm very blessed to be born an Englishman, to be born with a language that thankfully most people understand, and I can get away without learning Mandarin. But actually words really matter. And I've heard in Taiwan the word unification, and I actually think that's a dangerous word. Unification is not what the PRC wants. Unification applies about people coming together as partners. That is not Beijing's tactics. That is not Beijing's playbook. And if we want to see a lesson in that, we only have to look at Hong Kong to see where people's rights have been repressed, how they've been eroded. Let that be a lesson, a very stark lesson, and make sure that it is not repeated, because words do matter. Language conveys so much. What Beijing wishes to do is not unify. They wish to seize. They wish to annex. They wish to crush.
That is great. That is great. I know we're kind of short on time. I have 2 questions here. You want to make a comment? 3 questions. I'm going to take all questions together, right? And then I think maybe we can organize it that way.
Okay, thank you very much. Your speech is very clear. I think much more clear than some Taiwanese people. I also I'm Dr. Tu. I was the chairman of the Taiwan United Nations Alliance, so that I pay attention to these questions. I want to ask you a question or ask a favor that because the United States says that they recognize that PRC's idea that one China principle, that means Taiwan is part of that. So you mentioned that the one China policy. But you must recognize also the idea of Taiwanese people that we are not part of PRC. So do you think is it a good time, or when is a good time to change this one China policy to one China, one Taiwan policy?
Well, thank you. I think this is kind of like the fundamental argument or debate that Piero and I have, right? But anyway, here's another second question.
Hello, thank you. My name is Fang. I'm with the local newspaper, the Liberty Times. First of all, I want to say it's quite an honor to be called polite by a British gentleman, I'm afraid. So my question is first, what is your take on so-called Davison window, which starts in less than 2 years from now, in 2027? And the second one is, I'm also glad that Sir Williamson mentioned appeasement does not change tyrants, because China sees appeasement as weakness, and weakness is provocative. But sometimes only calling for help is also showing weakness. So my question is, if you were to recommend one thing to the Taiwanese government and people to do immediately, besides calling for more help, what would it be? And the last one is, so there's a news came out recently that you mentioned that China used their consulate to potentially be a spy center. So a news came out recently that the China plotted demonstrative connected action towards our Vice President Xiao recently. So, what's your opinion on this? Thank you.
So do we remember all the questions? We have one China, one Taiwan policy. We have, the 2-year window. And then if you have one advice to the Taiwanese government, what would that be? And then the last thing is about President Lai's, what was that?
Vice President Xiao.
What was it?
She's being when the PRC tried to...
Oh, they tried to hit her. The car tried to hit her from the back. But that news was quite a while ago and just came out. I'm sure you guys all are aware. Here's one more question here.
Sorry. Happy July 4th Day. My name is James New. I'd like to get to straight to the question and give a sharp question. Don't worry, I won't be too polite, as most Chinese. Everyone knows the threats and harm China poses to the democratic camp. Why don't Britain and the United States directly establish the diplomatic relation with Taiwan as the crucial means to block and fight China? Or is it just for the sake of China's vast market? In 1942, Taiwan was still under Japanese rule, and all Taiwanese were Japanese, including my grandfather, my father. However, my 2 uncles resolutely left Damzui, where they were born, to join the Allied forces. My eldest uncle flew bombers in UK to fight the Nazis, and his younger brother was in Australia to break Japanese military code. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. Take a look at what Taiwan's contribution to the world during pandemic. So Taiwan could be and must be the freedom world's best friend. Although my second uncle passed away in 2014 at the age of 100, my eldest uncle, his body, and his bomber, Hamden Mark I, have not been found yet to this day. My family went against the current and challenged the environment at that era when fascism was in power. Bravely defend freedom. So now, I also ask you, gentlemen, do use your influence to challenge the current situation when the power of Red China is spreading around the world, and urge your government to establish diplomatic relation with Taiwan as soon as possible, because it's the right thing to do. God bless you and God bless Formosa. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that kind of goes with the one China, one Taiwan policy a little bit. Now we have another question. Please keep it short.
Thank you to honorable gentlemen. Seems like a debate between 2 global strategies your 2 countries are adopting, and one for the UK, especially the Starmer administration, is like a global outreach, right? I think for the sending the Royal Naval ship to across Taiwan, and also UK to be support for Ukraine, and also we're looking for probably UK support for Taiwan's participation in the CPTPP. And meanwhile, we can see that China is building one big beautiful embassy in London. So that's like a global outreach over there. Meanwhile, the United States, especially the Trump administration, is adopting like a prioritizing strategy, which seems like U.S. should focus is outreach in the Pacific, when European countries, including UK, should just focus on the Europe. Like presumably, like UK can keep supporting Ukraine, but probably Indo-Pacific will just leave the US to take care of. So how do you approach this debate, and how do you think that both of the strategies can deter China? Thank you.
Similar to what we were speaking with MAC during lunch, how President Lai wishes to kind of strengthen the relationship with UK for national security, for our relationship, and also with the participation of different world organizations. So I think those are kind of similar and in a kind of logical sequence question, right? Do you want me to?
Sure.
Yeah, please. And so we might go a little bit over, but it's okay.
Yeah, we're here, and might as well. It's all right. I can wait. So no, thank you. Those are very thoughtful questions. And it is important, I think, to distinguish between the one China principle versus one China policy, and we do push back on the PRC's interpretation. Look, I think it's very important to understand that that Taiwan is a de facto nation in international law. It has its own defined, boundaries. It enforces its own law. It meets all the characteristics. Because of historical circumstances, there is also a de jure status that the Republic of China has, and you do have diplomatic relations with a number of countries. I think that, and I don't want to dodge the question, but I think there's a number of practical things that we can do. One, I think you mentioned, COVID and the World Health Organization. It is absolutely essential that Taiwan participate as a member of the World Health Organization. COVID is such a prime example. Something that is very clear, leaked from a laboratory, that Taiwan sounded the early warning on, and that the world suffered. And, if anything, and if you want to drive Beijing crazy, let's talk about reparations. And I know that's, it's a 100th century of humiliation. But what Beijing unleashed upon the world during COVID, all the nations of the world, is something that it should make recompense for. I think the notion of being a de facto state is important. Make no mistake about it. What Beijing is doing to Taiwan every time it sends airplanes and sorties, when it cuts cables, is in violation of international law. When it does it to other allies like the Philippines too, when it rams vessels, and you have Filipino sailors who've lost fingers there. This is all a violation of international law. In fact, it constitutes the crime of aggression. Aggression does not necessarily mean kinetic warfare. It's steps that are taken in anticipation of warfare. And that is what it does every time it tests Taiwan. That is the crime of aggression. That's set out in a number of documents, probably most clearly in the Rome Statute of the ICC, but we haven't ratified that, but it is a matter of Jus Cogens international law principles. As a matter of the United Nations Charter, this is the crime of aggression. So this needs to be called out as a practical matter. Well, but I don't think it. I don't think it is that ambiguous, because I think that it is international law is very clear, and the PRC under the Chinese Communist Party needs to be held to account for its lawless behavior. It's very important. And this is when we engage with China and the trade and all that, and I think people have hit on that, we must be very clear. China is not simply a strategic rival. It's not simply an economic rival. It's a systemic rival. It wants to take the rules-based international order and subvert it entirely and replace it with one of its own devising. They call it the shared common destiny for mankind. I think if you want to look at a template from Chinese history, in many ways, the strategy is very similar to that of the Qin dynasty, the first dynasty to unify China. You see that wolf warrior tactics, that military aggression there, but you also see the co-opting of elites, which was part of the Qin process, that it competed with these warring states, and it sought to co-opt them. You also see a 1,000 talent program. That was also something that the Qin dynasty engaged in. You had an ideology. There it was legalism, fa jia. You have an ideology here as well. Interestingly, the one elite or the one talent that wasn't co-opted by the Qin was Han Feizi, the chief ideologist of legalism, and he died in a prison or was suicided there. But very important, which I think some people don't always recognize, is the setting of standards. The hegemon sets the standards. The United States, we uphold the rule-based international orders. We're a protector of that. That's our role. But China seeks hegemony. They seek to control all under heaven, Tian Sha. During the Qin dynasty, it was the sinosphere. But now it really is the entire world, including the moon. During the Qin dynasty, that was when the Chinese written language was codified and standardized. That's when weights and measures were codified and standardized. That's when the ruts on the road so that carts and war chariots can pass through there was standardized and codified. What we see now with the PRC is an effort, whether it's technology, whether it's the efforts to undermine the dollar as the reserve currency. That's what BRICS is all about, and all of that. And most importantly, though, it is a resetting of what it means, what human rights mean. We see that we talked about organ harvesting. They're trying to make this the norm, and they have outreach to countries like Japan and Korea and doctors there. Doctors here in Taiwan, too, is an attempt to rechange norms. It's this, we saw this at the Universal Periodic Review at the United Nations, when China sought to redefine rights, not about civil and political rights, human rights as we understand it, but rather a right to development, these collective rights. That you're able to redefine rights so that when we're oppressing people, when we're denying them free speech, when we're denying them the right to life, well, that's not a right. That's not how we define rights. So it is this, again, this systemic struggle, and we have to be very clear about that. I don't know if I answered all the questions. There were a lot of questions there, but I think my colleague is more than capable of filling in the gaps.
Well, thank you ever so much, and so much to cover. I'm conscious as people will want to go home to their loved ones at some point, so I will try and make sure I cover them as quickly as possible. We certainly incredibly in favour of on the CTTP, Taiwan's involvement. I think Britain has been leading the way in sort of many different aspects of this, and certainly very much hope that it continues to do this. I think it's an important, I think that it is embarrassing if London hosts the largest spying centre for the communist China, and I very much hope that wiser voices and sense do prevail on that. I think Britain, every action it plays in Ukraine, supporting Ukraine, helping Ukraine, actually helps Taiwan. and many other countries like it. So, you know, the war against totalitarianism, the war against people overriding and stamping on other people's sovereignty is so vital. We have to do everything we can do to stand with our democratic brothers and sisters, and that is what you'll see Britain doing, you're seeing many other countries doing. So it's incredibly important, but I do not see Britain turning away from the Indo-Pacific, because I realised very quickly when I was Defence Secretary, there were two threats that we faced. One was Russia, and one was China. Russia, to me, when I went to visit Ukraine for that first time, and I went up to the line of control and I could see the fighting that was literally happening there, it was so incredibly obvious. I couldn't understand how everyone else could not also see it. The Chinese threat has always been slightly more disguised, but you have to will yourself not to see, because it is there the moment you just start trying to notice just a little bit more, because it is not that well hidden. And so Britain, I firmly believe, will continue to play a role because it's within our democratic, our security, and also our economic interests to make sure that there is peace, there is stability, and there is freedom in this area, the three things that actually also Taiwan so desperately wishes. Touched upon the sort of, I suppose, the threats, the 2-year window, how do you... I don't think there is weakness in turning to your friends and saying, how do you assist? And I think Britain, obviously there's other nations that have always had a deeper relationship and a longer relationship with Taiwan over many generations that Britain hasn't. But I still feel that we can play an important role. And I do not think that it is weakness to turn to a friend and to turn to an ally and say, how can we support one another? But actually, if we look at how we can strengthen that bond, it isn't just through military, it isn't just through security, it's through, you know, health, it's through education, it's about building that common bond. It is not a distant land. It is people with our same values, and that is something that we should be promoting. And then we come to the interesting and thorny topic of diplomatic relationships and one China policy. I mean, 4th of July, something happened, this rebel war. I'm not going to assert British sovereignty over the colonies that now call themselves the United States. History, nations, lives move on. New realities and alliances emerge. People who were enemies once are the strongest allies and friends next. Taiwan is not China. Taiwan is Taiwan. It is that independent, sovereign nation-state that stands proud and stands for itself. Every country around the globe needs to start reassessing what it is. We cannot keep pretending and having that fudged ambiguity. I accept that these things take time, but we need to be taking those continuous small steps to recognising what reality is. And I hope that Britain can do that. I hope that the United States can do that. I hope there's all other free countries will also do that. I accept it will take time, but the longer we put off taking those first small steps, the further away that will be. So let us all ask, and this is what I was saying about the politeness, because sometimes Taiwan maybe doesn't ask, and it is maybe not to ask straight away for recognition, but can we have ever more normalized relationships? Can we make sure that every country starts to deal with and accept the reality that is on the ground, that is the people and is the nation of Taiwan?
We have one comment here. Do you want to make a comment?
Yes. Thank you. I just wanted to, within 42 seconds, 60. Okay, stop. I don't want to waste time. I think the key to this all is to change the policies of governments on one China policy versus one Taiwan policy. Or any other change. It all comes out of the voice of a citizen, the power of a citizen. Therefore, educating our citizens is vital. And working together, as you mentioned, how do we collaborate together as a nation? It begs the question, citizen of what, or who, or where? And I would put forth on this Independence Day that we're in an era, we're in a dimension in which citizenship is global. And therefore, patriotism, a new realm of patriotism that's global. Taiwan, I am part of Taiwan, I'm a son-in-law of Taiwan. President Lai, after the inauguration we met, he knows my wife, he said, now you're a son-in-law of Taiwan. You are I'm your family. A crisis here, just like Abe said, is a crisis in my home. So citizen power with content that's clear, finding our voice, clarifying that moral authority. I think there's so much hope. And if you look at the incredible advances in business, technology, medicine, the innovative ability of corporations around the world to collaborate in real time in the business world, there are so many mechanisms and techniques and tools that we can apply. That's why the Taiwan Freedom Project is looking to work. I'm working with some of the top people in the world on strategy and innovation. How do you apply that practice into this foreign policy set of wicked problems? So let's work together. If you're interested, give me your business card. We'll put a network together and communicate. But thank you so much. God bless Taiwan. God bless America. God bless all of you.
Thank you. I kind of want to maybe give a little bit of my thoughts with this whole thing. I think culture is global. What we're battling here with in Taiwan, and I want to kind of, express this with our international friends, is that we don't want to confuse our ethnic identity with our national identity, right? So yes, many of the Taiwanese initially came from China, but that's ethnic identity. Taiwan is Taiwan today, I'm sorry. Taiwan is not China. We are Taiwanese. That's our national identity. I don't know if everyone, the audience here knows that Gavin is actually sanctioned by Russia. And I told him that as a badge of honor, his next step should be sanctioned by China. And I am helping him to get a step closer to that with the whole week of program, including our live streaming today and what you said. So thank you. I think we thank our international friends here from UK, from US, to help Taiwan. And with that, we conclude here.
We still have some hot coffee and iced tea and some sandwich. You please feel free to grab some. Take a picture. Please stay and let's take a picture together. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Take a picture first. Okay. Take a picture first.
I will listen and you will write to me, so I give you And by the way, I also think